Welcome to Solutions, where listening will leave you inspired by solutions to issues you or others you know may be struggling with in the public education system today. I am Olivia Wall, and I am honored to welcome my guests today, co-authors Ten Huynh and Beth Skelton. Let me tell you a little bit about them. Ten Huynh is a career international school teacher, consultant, and author specializing in secondary multilinguals and teacher collaboration. Beth Skelton has worked in the educational field for over 30 years, teaching elementary, middle, high school, and adult language learners in urban, suburban, rural, and international settings. You can learn more about both guests by checking out the show notes within this episode. Our conversation today is going to focus on their new book that they co-wrote. I have it in my hands. I'm very excited. Let me make sure. Here we go. Long-term Success for Experienced Multilinguals. They are generously offering a discount code for the book that I will also include in the show notes. Oh my gosh, it is my honor to welcome both of you, Beth and Ten, to be guests on Solutions. Thank you so much for taking the time to connect.
It's our honor. Thank you, Olivia,
Yeah.
for having us and marching along this march with us.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Olivia, for the invitation. We're excited to be here.
Yes. And we were just connecting a bit before the conversations began. And I think we have many inspiring educators from our life or mentors, coaches that we were just connecting around. But I love for listeners to hear from each of you who an inspiring educator is from your life. Would you share with listeners? Ten, do you want to go first, or Beth?
Oh, sure. So I still remember a science teacher and a science professor in college, and the way I teach writing is the way that she taught writing, one segment at a time. So she would say, "Okay, we're going to go do the introduction part. Let's look at all the research that we have. Then let's write it together. Then we say, okay, let's collect the data together, and then let's write about the data." And so every single section, it wasn't assigned, like other college classes. It was assigned and assumed. But this was very explicit instruction of how to write.
Yeah.
And so she has inspired me to this day.
Wonderful. Beth, how about you?
My inspiring teacher is everyone's first teacher, and that's my mom and your own mom. My mom was not only my first teacher, she was also a kindergarten, first grade career teacher, and I grew up in her classroom. So whether, I was 4 and didn't have a place for me to stay, I was in the kindergarten classroom with her. I was helping to set up, helping in quotation marks. And then when I was doing my own master's degree, I would call my mom and I'd say, "Mom, have you heard about this new way of teaching reading?" And she would listen with full interest. And then at the end, her favorite line would be, "Oh, is that what they're calling it now?"
Oh, I love it.
And, it was one of these where she, over 30 years as well, and education was her passion. And so unfortunately, she's no longer with us, but she is still my inspiring educator.
Yes, that's a wonderful anecdote. Thank you for sharing. I've let both of you know that your book touched my heart in a way. And I felt compelled to read it twice, back to back, which I rarely carve time for in life. It's busy these days. And I felt like I needed to recategorize the learning that I experienced the first time through for myself under some bigger umbrellas. The guise of this podcast is to name issues I'm seeing in public education and then seek out incredible, powerful change makers like both of you that lucky enough for us, you co-wrote a book. Your brilliance is interwoven. And you offer so many solutions to a myriad of issues. Some of the issues I want to name for listeners that your book addresses: creating exclusionary labels for students. We see it way too often in schools. Adults with deficit-based mindsets, which then completely it impacts students' own perception of themselves as learners. Sadly, an assumption that students that are multilingual are less capable intellectually or academically than other children. And this assumption has direct impacts on low graduation rates and
Wow.
ultimately social inequity. It's
Mm,
devastating. And yet both of you, there you are, shining a light on
thank
possibility
you.
for change. And that's what I'm so excited to talk about today. Some of the solutions I gleaned from your book that you will speak to today. We can shift our labels to be asset based. We can recognize the capital that multilingual children from their rich life experience can bring to our classroom. We can study collaboratively the many, many factors that impact multilinguals' development of grade level English proficiency. And we can collaborate, collaborate, collaborate. And
Hmm.
you offer amazing school wide frameworks for us to make sure that happens. Key term, school wide. This cannot be just
Yeah.
a classroom. So
Right.
let's jump in. I'm going to tease listeners before ask Tan to kick it off. Listeners, the graphics are absolutely gorgeous in this book, spectacular. There are sections called From the Field that will just give you a lens into the work live. The book is steeped with research, tons of just amazing research. There's a glossary of terms. Thank you for that. And there are appendices that take the pieces from the book and then just categorize it and capture it. So I'm going to stop talking. And Tan, I know you came to America at the age of 5 as a refugee, and that this life experience drives your work today. Can you please start off by defining for listeners who are multilingual learners for us in communities?
Right. Well, Olivia, I just want to say thank you first for reading the book, not once, but
Yes.
twice. We have read it several times, but to know that a teacher has like to carve out time
Mhm.
and then read it again, that is a very telling um, sign of affirmation. So thank you
Yes,
for that.
absolutely.
So, who are these multilinguals? Who are calling them experienced
Yeah.
multilinguals? These are students who are quote unquote long term English learners.
Mhm.
They have been classified as an EL, as an English learner, for the past 5 years. They might have received services, they might not, but they're still classified and they can't seem to get unclassified.
Yeah.
And when this happens, often, sometimes doors closes and paths are blocked,
Mhm.
meaning sometimes they get pulled out of classes. Sometimes they are not able to go to certain classes, maybe certain colleges or professional tracks or academic tracks. They're not allowed to because they weren't able to go into Lang and Lit, or they were still, or the college admissions is like, oh, you're still an English learner, and so of course you aren't
Mhm.
admitted. And so uh, we see this as, yes, an instructional book, but more as an equity book.
Yes, 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 yes. And so, Beth, chapter 1, the title is so strategic in the way it's called an affirming shift. Can you speak to that? What is the affirming shift that we need to consider?
Oh, thanks for picking up on that. That title name changed several times throughout the writing
Oh,
process, but really the whole chapter one is setting the stage of how do we shift the lens from looking at students who are currently titled this long-term English learner. How do we shift that perspective to an assets-based shift or assets-based approach? And so we really want to shift away from that term long-term English learner for several reasons. We are advocating, obviously, in the title for a new term focusing on those students' assets. Um, in the label that they are currently given, it's inherently deficit based.
yeah.
So you have this long term, as if there's something wrong with taking a long time to learn something.
Yeah.
Where in the majority of things in life, when someone takes 15 years to focus in on a skill and hone, the ability to play piano, or they take a lifetime
Yeah.
to develop a skill like in sports, we think that's fabulous, that they've focused in. And yet when someone takes a long time to learn English, suddenly there's something wrong with them.
Yeah.
It also assumes that there's a problem with taking 6 or more years when We know the long-term research that's out there, the longitudinal studies that have been done, the average to reach academic proficiency or grade level proficiency, the average length of time is around 6 years.
Ah.
So suddenly these students are getting a label, and they're really just like at the expected trajectory.
Mhm.
And sure, some students go faster and some take longer, but they're on the track, right? They're on the
Yes.
trajectory, and suddenly they get this label. And as Tan mentioned, that label then leads to a lot of deficit
Mhm.
based consequences for them. So let's take two terms that we're putting together: experience, that we see as a generally in our society, when someone has experience, that's seen as a positive.
Yes.
And we're saying, look, these students have experience in our schools,
Mhm.
right? They have experience being a student in an English medium school. And that's a term we use because the book is also for international students. And that just really means that it's a school where English is the language of instruction. That doesn't mean you can't use heritage language or that heritage language isn't allowed. It just means that most of the teachers, most of the time, are speaking English,
Mhm.
right? And the student is learning in English. And so they have experience with that. They have at least 5 years of experience
Okay.
doing that.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Let's build on that.
Mm.
They have experience with their heritage culture, their communities. They have experience with going to assemblies. Like they get it. They have friends. They have experiences. And then we also wanted to emphasize the asset, make that shift
Mhm.
that instead of focusing on the fact that they're still acquiring English, let's focus on the fact that they are multilingual. And we keep that term multilingual because they have at least one other language. So more than one
Yeah.
is multi.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So many of them, two, three, four, multiple languages that they are able to navigate at different levels of proficiency. And so we really are like, look, let's take that fact that they're experienced and the fact that they already have more than one language. And I would challenge many of the teachers that are working with them to say, do I have multiple languages that I can work
Yes.
with, at
Yes.
varying levels of proficiency?
Yes.
That these students have an asset, that let's build on that. So chapter 1 really is focused on helping us make that shift, that assets-based approach to working with students who have been in our schools for 5 or more years. And rather than seeing as something's wrong with them, let's see all the things that are right with them and how to build on all those things that are right with them. And not trying to be Pollyanna and say, no, there isn't anything that
Right.
that they don't need any support anymore, any of that. It's just, let's shift the lens so that we can now build on what they have and make sure that they can continue to grow.
And Beth, you really hearing that explanation is so clarifying because when I began my teaching journey in California, in San Diego, I taught at Marshall Elementary in City Heights, and most of our population was multilingual, but they were also newcomers. They were refugees, primarily from Somalia, and so it's a very different scenario. In that case, I think it's important for listeners to understand that these are not newcomers we're speaking to, and it's even more critical that we shift our mindset in labeling of these children, and so they have possibility. I love also the piece about expertise. Expertise is looked upon as a good thing, a positive, and we need to think about that. The last piece I keep bouncing around in my mind is the idea of adults utilizing their professional capital in a community. And I kept thinking about that as I was reading that, I don't know whether we're calling it professional capital, but when it comes to children, how about life capital? How about experience capital, right? Can we coin that term maybe? I don't know.
Right, I
Uh,
like
right. But
that.
it made me think about that. And then shifting a bit of our conversation to the idea of planning. I have realized as a coach these last few years that everything in the classroom comes down to planning.
Yep,
Planning and priming before we ever see the children, planning
right,
for, what obstacles the children may face by living the work ourselves
right,
first. So,
nice.
Tan, I'd love for you to speak to what are some nuances of planning that we need to keep in mind, especially I love the chapter that speaks to planning with the end in mind.
In mind,
right?
yes.
So, Tan, can you
Yes.
speak to that for listeners?
I can. I just want to add one more thing to Beth's conversation about experiences. One thing that because we're working with middle school and high school students, they have cognitive skills
Yeah.
that, for example, I don't have to teach the concept of paragraphing. When I say paragraphing, the kids get it.
Yeah.
But because they're in middle school, high school, but elementary school, you have to actually stop and teach that a different way. And
Yes.
so these kids have the cognitive ability, and one of the best cognitive ability is the ability to see connections between languages.
Yes.
So that cross-linguistic transfer, that's how they can acquire language more quickly. That's why we call them experience. So let's talk about planning. And so as a teacher, I think the biggest shift that I had when I first started teaching was planning activities to planning for a goal at the end.
Huge.
My first few years was just pearls of disconnected activities. I would do this, and then that, and then let's create this, and let's cut this out, and let's create this. But it wasn't a single theme. But when I read Understanding by Design,
Yes.
I was like, oh my goodness, this is what it is. Oh, I have to think about, I have 9 weeks. By the end of 9 weeks, students have to produce this and demonstrate this and that. So then let's plan backwards at the 8th week, and then the 7th week, and then the 6th week, and all the way back. So what happens on the first day?
Yes.
Right. And so when we work with experienced multilinguals, we have to talk about the intentionality of every lesson. It has to go back to the assessment. What are they learning? What's the content they're learning? What are skills they have to use to talk about that content, or to demonstrate their thinking about the content? And so that's our lesson planning template. We start first with, so the daily lesson, we start first with the assessment, or summative assessment, whatever that is. Then we say, okay, by the end of this period, what do we want students to be able to do? And we say, can you write that in a prompt? For example, mine would be thinking about my 9th graders that just recently school ended. They had, in science class, they had to identify when a solution is oversaturated, undersaturated, or soluble. Right. And so that's a very clear thing that students have to use those 3 words at the end of the period to say, okay, I'm going to give you a solution. Tell me if it's supersaturated, undersaturated, or saturated. Right. And then I have to write out the model response. Students have to say, when we look at this degree, when we say at 70 milliliters, this solution is supersaturated because da, 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 da.
Yes.
And that's the kind of language that I have to use, because if I don't teach that as a science teacher, students will say saturated, unsaturated. So it becomes a guessing game.
Yes.
Right? So now that we have the model response, we then write the integrated objective, which is identify when a solution is supersaturated, undersaturated, or saturated. Right? And then from there, we say, okay, how am I going to teach them these 3 words? Supersaturated, saturated, and undersaturated.
Yes.
Well, maybe I should use a diagram with 3 different colors to show them. Right? Anything above this line is supersaturated, and we're going to color 1 color. Anything below that line is undersaturated. And so right away, kids have that image. So they have an image that's attached to a scientific word that they have to use. Everything we just said was comprehensible input. Kids understanding what supersaturated, saturated, unsaturated is. Now we have to get students to communicate like scientists.
Yes.
So we plan for the output. So what I would say is, you start off with the solution amount. Then you say, is it saturated, unsaturated, or supersaturated? And then you say the reason because. Right? And so that's the formula. When we plan this way, we no longer are assuming kids understand because I taught it. We're now saying we're making sure, to the best of our abilities, that students can understand the content and have the skills to communicate their understanding. And that's how we plan backwards every single day.
And I love the idea of, if starting with how many weeks do I have to speak to this content? We have to start there. So really the broad stroke of a year at a glance chunks of
Right.
time with content
Right.
topics that are highly engaging
Right.
to children. And this goes across every content area, right? It's not just
Right.
science, it's ELA, social study, whatever we're speaking to as a topic.
Right.
But by knowing the amount of weeks we have, knowing the end reading, writing, talking, problem solving work we want children to do, then
Right.
yes, we can plan daily lessons with circling back to those. And the other layer that I've been working with teachers around is let's also begin with some long-term unit targets that we can
Yes.
speak to out of the gate with all students. Immersion. This is going to be the end product that you're crafting. These are some
Right.
long-term, only 2 or 3 for a chunk of time, long-term targets.
Right.
We have some supporting nested targets underneath, grounded in standards. And then my favorite thing about this, when you are that thoughtfully planned as an educator, in your content expertise for your students, the daily flows, Tan, because you can then say,
Yes.
okay, I thought this was what I wanted the children to get yesterday based on their exit ticket. This is what went well. This is what didn't. I can tailor
Right.
my daily because I have the
Right.
long-term vision in mind, right?
Right.
So
Exactly.
Beth, oh my goodness, the scaffolds, the integrated objectives in the book, the graphic charts. I just ended up making a list of every graphic in the page it's on and what it speaks to, because I would love to just take the book and unpack the graphics and decide how we could
Oh, yeah.
utilize those as educators. They're magnificent. So how are scaffolds, how are integrative objectives critical, or why are they? And I also want, if you're so gracious to speak to, the idea that some adults push back on over scaffolding. Is there such a thing? Can we over scaffold in your mind? So will you speak to that?
Yes. I thank you for doing that. Let's talk the scaffolds first, and then I'm going to turn it back over to Tan about over scaffolding.
Ah.
He's been really working with this right now with his educators as well.
Wonderful.
And the answer is yes.
Mhm.
And that we are learning from our students, when do they need a scaffold and when not. And as one of my colleagues, I think it's Tanya out in California, she says, it's harder to know when to lose a scaffold than when to use a scaffold.
I like that.
We get really good about like, here, use a scaffold, but then when it's time to lose it, we get uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And so sometimes it's just listening in or looking at their writing and saying, oh, clearly they need a scaffold now. And I have that ready.
Oh.
And once you have that integrated objective, then you know where are the possible supports and how can I scaffold that learning. I'm going to use this math example because I've just spent some days working directly with math teachers, and math is another excellent place for building academic language. And math teachers are really good at making sure students know how to do the problem.
Mm.
But then when it comes to explaining that, to getting the language out, it shifts. So let's take your idea of an exit ticket. You just said, hey, we can look at their exit tickets and plan the daily lessons. So many exit tickets in a math class are simply solving a problem or solving the algorithm. So my encouragement back to math teachers is to say, let's add that language piece to the exit ticket.
Yes.
And so instead of just solve this problem or find the area of this trapezoid, which I can do with no language, right? And I can show you that I have the math skill. Let's switch that prompt to explain how to find the area of a trapezoid. Right? Now we are elevating language and content, and we're making everyone in that class, we're providing the skill set that person could become a math tutor. That person could explain in a boardroom. That person could, right? We are giving them that gift that later in life, they have the ability to explain what they can do.
Yes.
They can explain their thinking process. So then, just like Tom said, I ask the teacher to say, what would that sound like? What would a really good response sound like?
Mm-hmm.
And the teacher started off, well, first you have to identify the 2 bases. Then you have to measure the length of each base. And while the teacher is talking, right, I'm making notes because I am looking at not just the vocabulary, but the sentence structure, and then that whole discourse level of how did that answer glue together, right? Oh my goodness, they used these transition phrases. They had words like base and measurement. And So then we talk as a team, if we're co-planning, and say, hey, how are you going to teach these key words? That's where your idea of scaffold comes in.
Yes.
Okay. So then I'm going to throw it back to the teachers and say, is it over scaffolding if I label my trapezoids with base and sides? Right? Is that over scaffolding or not? And they're going to be like, every student needs to know the term base. Like they always get confused of what a base is on a trapezoid.
Yes.
So they'll say that's great. So that would be like it comes in a couple of different categories, and we break down types of supports into 5 different supports or scaffolds. And this comes a lot from WIDA, as well as a few extras that we add in there. And like a sensory scaffold then would be a visual labeled example or a labeled trapezoid.
Yes.
Right? So we have a visual of it and it's labeled. And then, okay, so maybe they understand that's comprehensible input of what those bases are. But at some point, those students are going to have to interact with it. They're going to have to look at that and talk about it so they get a chance to practice with the language in class.
Yes.
So I might add a linguistic scaffold. And that linguistic scaffold could be where I just give the word bank and they're going to have to start describing the steps for finding the measurement of any trapezoid.
Okay.
So now I've expanded beyond just here. This is this one trapezoid example that I know how to do. But now I have the concept and I've been practicing with my partner. What's the first step? First step, identify the bases. Okay, point to the bases, right? And we're having them partner. That's an interactive scaffold using the language. The linguistic scaffold is a word bank. Make sure you use the word base, right?
Yes.
And measurement. And so we build all of this, and then possibly we add a graphic scaffold where the students have manipulatives, another sensory scaffold. Okay.
Yes.
And they're manipulating and they're charting out and like, this is a trapezoid, not a trapezoid, and they're sorting. So now they've got all of these things going on to support their comprehension of where I want them to be at the very end, which is explaining the process of finding the area of a trapezoid.
Wow.
And that was just an example that came from my work this week with math teachers specifically. And when we got done looking at all of those categories of scaffolds, pretty much all of them said, actually, I think all my students need that.
Yes.
Right? Okay. But if at any point you feel like it's over scaffolding, pull it back.
Okay.
And so the other question that we ask is, a scaffold is temporary. And so if you pull that scaffold, and we have a visual in the book that that it's like the actual scaffold around a building.
Yes.
The idea is that the scaffold allows me to reach higher levels. It allows me to build up on the building and build up on my experience in a sense, right?
Yes.
So if I pull that scaffold, and it's so cool that this is recorded because I'm using my hands, but if I pull that scaffold away and the building falls down, well, it wasn't time yet, or that wasn't scaffolding the essential skill. And so we really have to think of, what is it that I'm scaffolding, and am I clear about that? Sometimes we give scaffolds, we give tools, and that's all the student knows. They haven't learned the skill behind it. So we really have to be careful. And I'm going to share with Tan, because he's done a lot of work with his own students and the teachers he works with, of when is it a supportive scaffold, meaning I'm actually building up with this.
Yes.
And when is it over scaffolding, meaning I just created dependence, and that is an issue. So Tan, if you want to share some of those those ideas that you're working on.
Right. The short answer is already what Beth has shared. When we share a strategy, such as a sentence frame, if kids don't have the language to use that, then add the sentence frame. But when you notice students are just answering and filling the blanks and not connecting ideas between sentences, that's when there's over scaffolding.
Okay.
There's no thinking behind it.
Yeah.
When kids are completing a task, just because the task tells them to do that, that's over scaffolding. When they are able to apply the skills independently to a new context, that's when they don't need the scaffolding. So I have identified, I'm working with my social studies teacher. I am a closet over scaffolder. So I joined. That's the only thing I'm closeted about in my life. And so I worked with my science teacher, and she's like, I don't like the scaffolding that has happened in the past. And I was like, I over scaffold. Let's work together to figure out how can we
Yes.
balance this. She looked at a student's example, a science lab report in October, and it was the scaffolding that we inherited years ago. And it was just simple sentence starters
Okay.
like answer this, answer that, but there's no connection between it.
Yeah.
She's like, she showed me the work of a student in October. She's like, this is not the kind of scientific thinking we want. She's just answering questions and moving on.
Yeah.
It's just task completion, but not skill development.
Mm.
So we said, well, what can we do? We then sat down and we wrote the guiding questions and prompts for each section. So we took away the sentence starters, except for a few sections,
Yeah.
like the hypothesis. You have to formulate a hypothesis in a very specific way.
Yes.
But everything else is just prompts. Right? For example, it might be identify something that you did well in the experiment, like how you designed it and what impact did it have.
Oh,
Identify something that you designed in the experiment that was a flaw, and explain why was this a flaw. So all those prompts, instead of saying one flaw that I experienced was,
Yeah.
right? And so we're getting kids to be able to really be creative with the way they write.
yeah.
And they can structure writing in any way they want, because experienced multilingualists have experience using social language.
Mhm.
They just need now the structure of thinking and then structuring their language in a more academic way. Writing those prompts in a very sequenced way. We looked at the student's example in May, and she's like, I just want to show you the paragraph that the student wrote,
Ah.
and look at the sentences. The sentences are bridging each other, are connecting with each
Yes.
other. And that's because instead of saying, complete this lab report with these sentence starters, use these prompts now to think about the questions the answers you might produce.
Mm.
That was the difference. Right?
It feels very student centered. It feels very reflective, and I
Yes.
love that. You know, I touched my chest because close to my heart. I think that it's important for us to think about, you know, that reflective and individualized voice of
Right.
each student. Beth, what did you want to jump in with?
Yeah, the same concept of this over scaffolding and when do we know?
Yeah.
So I was working with an 8th grade English language arts teacher, and we haven't mentioned that content area yet
Yes.
on the podcast. So another tricky place, because many of our experienced multilinguals are in English language arts classes, and it is still one of the most difficult areas for them to be in.
Yeah.
And this 8th grade English language arts teacher pushed back on me, and she said, I'm not going to provide sentence frames. That is, they have to know how to do that. And I said, that's fine. Are you going to teach them how to take your prompt and create their own sentence frames? And she said, I am willing to give a class period for that. So I got to co-teach it with her. And we taught how to deconstruct this really complex prompt about identifying character traits and justifying which trait led the character to
Wow.
X,
Yeah.
Y, or Z. It was one of those classic English language arts prompts. And so we just did a mini lesson on, first, the kids had to chunk that prompt themselves, and there were 3 parts. And they had to learn where to break it down. So they personally, on their own paper, broke it down.
Lovely.
The second thing that she had them do is take each of the chunks and create their own starters for
Wow.
how are you going to say identify? You say the character traits, blah, blah, blah are, and then list them. Great. The one that, caused the character, the most important one or whatever
Yeah.
was, and then what's the justification? So she took the time in her class to teach the skill. And Tan and I are big fans of teaching learning strategies. And that in itself is a learning strategy that student can use later in life if they are filling out a job application. You can take the question and turn it into the starter for how you're going to answer that question on your own job application. So this is not just like for getting by in language arts. It's not just to fill in the blank. It is a life skill.
Yes.
We're really big on that. That is what Zaretta Hammond calls turbocharging. Teaching them how to learn is the turbocharger. And so I'm quoting her. I just heard that and I'm like, yes, that is exactly what's going on
Yes.
here, right?
Yes.
So we want to do the same thing. And I am totally fine if you are willing to take the time in your class to not provide the sentence starter, but teach the skill to
how.
create your own. Awesome.
Boom. Yeah.
However, I also totally recognize that the math teacher is like, there's no way I'm taking a math lesson to teach how to start it, then put it in. So you have these options. We have the tools to either scaffold or teach the learning strategy along the way. I'm fine either way.
I love the idea of choice as well. And so it offers the educator autonomy. And we cannot forget to ask students, what do they need?
Right.
I think so often when an adult speaks to me about learned helplessness or, over scaffolding, the first question I ask is, have you talked to the student as to whether that person thinks they need the scaffold anymore? And
Right.
often the response is no, and it's mind-boggling to me. Why is that child or that learner not the first place we're going to? They often know if they need it or not. And if they're just being compliant and filling in worksheets or tasks, right? And so I know you offer instructional frameworks in the book for school-wide commitment. I do want to speak to that, but page 42, there was a quote, because I want to linger for a moment in our conversation around content area teachers also being academic language professionals, right? So the quote on page 42, we believe the most equitable place for experienced multilinguals is in content classes because they provide the fertile soil for both content and academic language to grow. So
Yes.
I take that quote and I circle back to the child that said it was freedom. We have to offer those opportunities. So, Tan, I would love for you to explain the benefits of, because you live this, being a content area teacher,
Right.
seeing themselves as academic language teachers.
Right. The benefit is that so just going back to our lesson plan, comprehensible input, comprehensible output. The benefit is when we plan this way, when all teachers become teachers of their content, they think about, how can I make this concept more understandable? How can I make trophic cascade something understandable to students?
Mhm.
And then the academic language is, how can I have students communicate, talk about trophic cascade as if they're a biologist in the field?
Yes.
Because we can say, oh, the animals, there are less animals. Wait, what? We want to say, when we took away the tertiary predator, such as the Yellowstone wolves, this caused dot, 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 dot. We want students to sound like professionals because we know that they'll do research in the future and they need to be respected and seen as credible researchers. But if they don't have that language, that academic language, that other people who are reading their report, they're gonna like, well, I'm not reading this.
Right.
This is not valid because it's not structured in a way that we as scientists are looking for.
Yes.
And so that's our job, to give students that freedom of the future to be whatever they want to be and do whatever they want to do, because now they have the language. When we as content teachers teach for comprehensible input, comprehensible output, we structure, create the conditions for students to be successful in the long term.
Yes, yes. Page 182, this quote got to my heartstrings because it is a conundrum. I just learned the term from another guest, Christy Linanana, Kobayashi Maru from Star Trek, and it speaks to a puzzle or a problem that may never be solved. And she
Yes.
elaborated and said, Kirk always cheats. And so he solves it. It's a win-win. But I feel like the idea of collaboration and scheduling in schools is a Kobayashi Maru in a way. I'm using that term now. So the quote on page 182, the master schedule is the key that unlocks the potential for teachers to collaborate. If that master schedule is not orchestrated by the building administrator to allow for as much collaboration as possible across teams, across content areas, in just a myriad of ways, we are in big trouble because that is not going to serve students, right? So,
Right,
Beth,
right.
could you speak to how collaboration amongst the staff directly impacts the oral and written output that we see in classrooms?
Oh, thank you for going to this last chapter, because this is where the magic can really happen. And it takes the whole book from one individual teacher who, as Tan often said, yay, I won the teacher lottery.
Yeah.
I got so and so, right? Or I got in that section of science or that section of math versus another section. And so we want to kind of get rid of that teacher lottery idea. And it's like everyone's a winner on the teacher end and the student end. Like we're all winners because we're working together. But it really does hinge on a master schedule that allows for it. Let me give you an example of some work I did in a school that totally got this. Now, experienced multilinguals by definition wouldn't be identified until like 5th grade. But we know that in 4th and 5th grade, this is the turning point. Are
Yes.
students going to exit the program if they started with us in kindergarten or 1st grade, us meaning in the system, in the school? If they started in kindergarten, 1st grade, and they're ready to exit, if they don't leave by 4th or 5th grade, like if they're not reclassified as fully English proficient, as the term is, then they are now long-term English learners or experienced multilinguals, and that deficit often happens in middle
Yes.
school, that lens. So this elementary school realized that, and they had a very high percentage of multilingual learners, majority experienced multilinguals, not newcomers.
Yeah.
So we sat down and they said, in elementary school, as you know, the only time that teachers have a chance to collaborate is during electives or specials.
Right.
Yes.
When students go to library, when they go to gym, that's when teachers can have time to get together. But that's also the teacher planning time.
Yeah.
They listen to teachers. How can we make this work? Kids have one special a day. How can we create more time in the day? And super creative brainstorming session. As a team, we created a second specials in an elementary school. Boof.
Awesome.
And they said, we are going to take teachers, and this is another brilliant thing they did. They said, social studies and science do not get the same weight as math and language arts at an elementary school.
Right.
What if we create that as a specials, that the kids go and we have one teacher who is the specialist for science, and they get all the tools and the equipment, just like art, just like PE. And so now the students get 2 specials a day. So outside of the teacher's classroom, the teachers have 2 planning sessions a day so that we can
Wow.
build in that collaboration across the curriculum. So this is super exciting because it's going to happen in the fall, but the rest of the schools in the district, the elementaries are like, what are you doing? How are you
Of
doing that?
course.
How did you reconfigure it? Right? We want that too.
Yes.
And it was about equity for teachers as well, because secondary teachers in middle school and high school have 2 planning periods. They have 2 hours that they can do that collaboration generally
Yes.
in that district. So that was one idea of creative solutions that the principal was on board with. And he said, let's make this happen. Let's think outside of the box. And the whiteboards in the planning room were completely filled. We, brainstormed. And then we took it back to the teachers. And we said, here's plan A, here's plan B, here's plan C. What do you think? This is the ramifications. This is what it means for you. What do you think? And they were so on board. But now one of those periods every single day is available for collaborative planning. And that key is when we started talking about, well, if the teacher doesn't have time to teach how to do sentence frames, for example, like how to create your own, well, then in one class they get sentence stems, in another that goes away because we know we are teaching it, and that's the expectation across the board. So there's no student that like, oh, in this class I can answer with one word and get away with it. Right? It's across the board. We all have high expectations. We all know what students can do. We are looking at work every time we get together to collaborate and co-plan. We're looking at what's that student's work in your class during math? What's the work look like in English language arts? What's the work look like? Right? We can do vertical alignment. What's the work look like in 6th grade, 7th grade, 8th grade? Are the expectations increasing? Or is it in 8th grade? Really? In 6th grade, you have them write a 5-paragraph paper, but in 8th grade, I'm only expecting a paragraph. That just goes away because we have created the structures for teachers to truly get together during the school day, not asking them to stay after, not asking them to come at 6 a.m., not asking them to give up their lunch in order to collaborate. And so now students know that that expectation is across the board.
Yes.
And one of the things, and not to get too far into it, but in chapter 7, one of the things that we really encourage is some kind of academic English plan for our experienced multilinguals. That all teachers know, and the student has co-created it. The student is part of it, saying, this is what I need. Like you said about supports, we ask them, what supports help you to get there in this class? Let's put that in the plan that all teachers know
Yeah.
this is this is a scaffold that works for you. So that's part of the conversation when you were talking about ask the student.
Yes.
That's that academic English plan. That happens with the students. And then the students know every one of my teachers knows that this is a support that helps me and
Mhm.
this is my language goal. And we're all working on it.
Beth, something you're just reminding me of is the importance of having students involved in their goals from the start. And this actually just came up with another school district I'm supporting. I asked at the elementary level how many students sit in on their 504, on their IEP meetings. And the director of special education said, well, it's an option, but we rarely have children do it. And I said, well, how clear are we that it is an option? Because I think as a caregiver, I would love for my child to be there. Some districts rock student-led conferences in a beautiful way. And so that could be another layer. And I have a question. I have a wondering of something I'm struggling with that I'd love to hear your perspective on. And Ton, maybe you could help illuminate this for
Okay,
me.
sure.
What we sit here right now with, I think, a very common core belief system between the three of us.
Hmm.
We
Right.
believe from our head to our toes in children and that children can. Sometimes I meet teachers that are resistant to committing to the
Hmm.
work. And
Right.
Tana, the words Beth spoke to, I've heard you say that we don't want to hit the teacher lottery, or that shouldn't
Yeah.
exist.
Yeah.
And what do we do when there is an adult that is reluctant or resistant to change, most likely out of fear? Right.
Yeah.
But is it an admin that steps in? It's certainly not a coach. Like, how
Right.
do we move that needle for that adult? Because that's fair for
Right.
children.
Right. Well, we have to first ask, are they willing to learn? If they're not, then I'm going to be going to a different fertile plot to continue growing there. So when you're ready, it's more like
Mm,
uh, what I see is when I play with teachers, I see red, yellow, and green.
mm.
When someone says no, that means probably not now,
Yeah.
right? So I'm like, okay, you're not probably ready. Let me go work with someone
Okay.
else, right? Until you're ready,
Mhm.
and I will. And then if someone says no to my scaffolds that I co-created with somebody, or it's an invitation to a scaffold, then I'm going to work with kids in that class regardless. Right?
Okay.
It won't be collaborative,
Yes.
right? When someone says maybe, I hear that as a show me how,
Okay.
right? And so I will co-create that. So this is what I have in mind. What are your thoughts about this table that I created based upon what you said? No, let's change this part. Let's merge these two. So that gets closer to a yes.
Okay.
When someone says yes, then I say, let's do it
Yeah.
together, right? So I don't push. Um, when someone pushes back, I wait. I plant a seed and said, "Okay, you're not. This is something that you're not interested in doing. What are you interested? What would it be?
Mm.
What would you like to do?" Because though we want to use our cognitive capacities to co-create, not to convince.
Oh, I love that.
Right? Right. And so if someone is saying, I don't want to do that, I'm not going to spend 90% of my cognitive abilities to try to convince them
Right.
otherwise. Right. I would simply say, okay, you don't want to use this template. What would you like to do to get kids to this goal?
Yeah. Yeah.
And then now I put it back in them. I say, well, I could do this. Great. Then let's use that. How would you like to use it? Right? And so I'm hearing very sensitively and I honor their no.
Mm.
And I find out where their yeses are.
Ton, you know what it makes me think of with the colors? In years past, I believe so strongly in zones of development and
Yes.
Vygotsky's work. And I
Yes.
often saw the red when I was coaching adults as a zone of frustrational development. So the
Yes.
no is because
Yes.
it's so far beyond what
Right.
is feasible for them. And then the yellow for
Right.
me was proximal of this is a
Yes.
stretch, but if you give me some ways to get there, I can do it.
Yes.
And then with a
Together,
right
yes.
together, always together. And then the yes was, I think this is a strength of mine and I am still a learner and I want to get
Yes.
even better at what I'm
Yes.
doing. And that to
That's it.
me is what it is about being a learner. Like
Right.
we're never done. We're always
Yeah.
getting smarter and
Right.
growing. And the key word is together, right? This is
Yes. Yes.
collaborative. It's a
Right.
co in service of
Right.
children. And how lovely for
Right.
kids to see the co-teaching, the co-planning, all of this that goes into it, because it says we love you. It's tending to children. It's tending to our students, right?
Yes, we're modeling.
Yeah, we are. So I know you have an explicit sequence of actions when it comes to implementing an instructional framework school-wide. I'd love for you to speak to that. Tan, something I love that you and Beth include in the book is an explicit sequence of actions to implement this work school-wide as a framework. Could you take us through those actions?
Yeah, we take it as like something small, then medium, then big.
Okay.
So the first systematic approach is starting small with the individual student. This is looking at students' work. This is possibly looking at co-creating an individual lesson plan or like an individual learning plan, academic English learning plan for them. So it's very individualized. Because instead of saying like, I feel overwhelmed and all doing all of this, let's just focus on one kid. Because that all we need is that confidence.
Yes.
That confidence is the first seed that grows the forest.
Yeah. Wow.
Then we move to saying, okay, let's move to the classroom. Once we are comfortable with supporting a kid, let's look at what do all the other kids need.
Yeah.
So we can maybe co-plan an assessment or co-plan a lesson together, right? And then, so there's the first individual student, then bigger to a classroom, not looking at an entire grade, right? Just one classroom. Which of your 5 classrooms do you have? Let's focus on just one.
Yes.
Right? More manageable, small wins. And then the next part is when they're comfortable with the classroom level scaffolding and creating instruction for that, we move to something bigger, which is the department. We say, now we look at, okay, maybe we look at all the 8th graders instead of just 8.1. Now let's think about all the 8th graders here, or let's think about all of your classes together. And the way we do that is through lesson study. We say, okay, I'm going to teach this lesson about Industrial Revolution, in particular, the steam engine. I will co-create the lesson together. I will deliver it. Everyone else in my department, they take off for that period and they come observe. They get subs. Everyone else in the department watches how I attempt to deliver the instruction that is scaffolded for the comprehensive input and comprehensible output. We then come back and we sit together and say, what did you notice about that lesson? That we co-created together, that we agreed, okay, you're going to start with this, then move to that and end with this. You're going to use this graphic. We're going to use this series of prompts to get students to write. We're going to use this word bank. We're going to use this diagrammed image. And then we're going to analyze, did it work?
Okay.
And then when this happens, this is so systematic that now the whole department will start planning this way.
Yes.
And so we move from little, individual, most possible, to classroom, to whole department. So there's not just a student saying, yes, I won the teacher lottery by being with Miss Wall. I get to be with everybody.
I love it. I love it. I love it. And I love that it begins with the individual student, because that's where all of our conversations should begin, with the kids, right? Beth, yeah.
Yeah, and in addition to that, and the lesson study, when the teachers are in that classroom observing that co-planned lesson, we all had responsibility in this. So it's not like just on Mr. Tan and what he's doing. It's about we co-planned this. And when I'm in watching, I'm actually watching those individual students. And I know what their individual academic English plan is. So like I'm watching, are they using the language? Are they responding to the scaffold? Is it over scaffolded? Did they need that scaffold? So I can, as an observer, actually gather that student-centered data. It's super hard to do when you're teaching a whole class.
Yes.
Like I just can't monitor. I can't circulate enough to get all of that data as an individual teacher. So it is a gift. It is a gift to the students. It's a gift to the teachers to get that student-centered data, because there might be 4 or 5 or 6 adults in the room that are sitting with different collaborative groups of students. And I can be like scribing what they, transcribing what they're saying. And then later I bring that data and we can all discuss it. And like, wow, Jose didn't need that scaffold at all. Listen to what he said. Or, wow, they really used the word bank, or whatever it is. Like, so that we can see, did it quote unquote work? We determine what work is. Like, did it serve its purpose? Did the scaffold work? We've determined that before I ever went in to observe. that leads us right back to that individual academic English plan, and we can revise, we can think about, we can talk to the student about different goals because of what we saw in that lesson study. So it is really a cycle of implementation.
Beth, what I absolutely adore doing, and it's taken some practice, I'll just put it out there. But when we are running learning labs in a district I'm working with, I've been coached around let's all jump into the same Google Doc. So as
Yeah.
we're watching the facilitator, we have a 3-column table that we're using. The first column is what are the teachers saying and doing? What are the students saying and doing?
Right.
And then I really appreciate the idea of knowing whom we're seeking or looking at as children, so we can have plans in mind. The middle column is why does this matter to student engagement? Why is this important? And the last column is, what are wonderings I'm having now about my own practice, about implications for children moving forward. The research I am obsessed with as of late in my own planning for when I'm teaching in classrooms is Alison Zamuta's research around classroom roles of a teacher.
Mm.
And when I am looking at a chunk of time that I have with any group of children, I'm asking myself, she has 6 roles that she outlines. I'll put a link to her research in the show notes. But I'm asking myself, is my curriculum planner role really in the classroom, or does that happen before I'm in? What roles am I using when I'm teaching? Is it the coach and facilitator? Absolutely. Is it an assessor? Absolutely. So you go through those roles, and I like to have someone watching me when I'm teaching just for the roles and how I'm balancing them at the same time. So that's another lens we can look through as well. Awesome.
Right. Nice.
Yeah.
Nice.
So, let's wrap our conversation, although I think we could chat all day. What do you see as a call to action to propel this work and ensure that long-term success for our experienced multilinguals?
My call to action with teachers is to sit with someone else to maybe read this book to say, what can we do for our students?
Yeah.
Right. And so it's less of like, of saying there's a system, there's a structure, there's a framework.
Mhm.
How can we implement this framework in our own experience? Right? And then the reason why they do it with a partner is because they cannot sustain this by themselves. It's great that they do. What they need is that extra boost,
Mhm.
is that collaborative learning together, saying, I tried it this way. What did you think?
Yeah.
Well, I tried it this way. Oh, let's do that in the future.
Mhm.
And so it's embedded and it's sustained and it's community based, because then um, it we won't fall to the whims of this initiative, that initiative. When we do it together, we stay together.
Yeah.
And then it's kind of like that African proverb says, if you want to go faster, go alone. If you want to go farther, go together.
Yeah. So, Beth, what would you say our call to action is?
Oh, I thought about this while Tan was talking. And so he has given a really great one about this supporting each other and collaborating. I'm going to go back to the individual student.
Mm.
And as a call to action is to say, let's stop giving students all the fish and teach them to fish. So as if Tan is giving a proverb, here's another proverb. And what that means to me is teaching them how to learn and get that here's the learning strategy.
Okay.
And this shifts and gives a lot of independence. Students become more motivated because they know
Yes.
how to comprehend text. They know how they can learn that skill in math. They have developed the strategies that will serve them throughout their lives.
Yeah.
And I think this is a shift for all teachers as well. So we're getting pretty good at providing the scaffolds and giving them,
Mhm.
but then thinking through, how do I actually learn something new? What are those skills that
Yes.
I've developed? Let me teach my students that skill. And I'll just go back to the quote from Zaretta Hammond because I think it is so powerful,
Me
is
too.
that learning how to learn, that's the turbocharger for our students.
Right.
And I absolutely believe that for our experienced multilinguals as well.
I do as well. And I have learned so much from both of you before we ever met, from your book, from your research. You both have websites that are beautiful and offer a lot of lovely resources. I will include those in the show notes. How do you prefer to be reached? Are your websites the best bet for listeners? Awesome.
Yeah, you can contact me on tankwyn, HUYNH.com, or I'm on Twitter a lot. So I'm responsive on Twitter. So it's the same thing, TANK and Wyn, HUYNH. So I'd love to hear from everybody.
Beautiful. Beth, how about you?
And same thing, bethskelton.com, my name, or I'm also responsive on Twitter, and that's at EA Skelton. So either way, sounds great.
Wonderful. And again, I'll include links to all of your details and information in the show notes. I want to end our conversation just with a quote that touched my heart, and I think it speaks to so much around our conversation today. It's on page 178. Magic happens when every teacher in a school believes that through their collective effort, every student can be successful. And that is exactly what I believe. I'm so glad you captured that in the book. Thank you so much for taking the time to connect and be in conversation today. Both of you are doing incredibly important work. Thank you.
Thank you for having us on the podcast, affirming our work, and being part of it as well through this podcast, Olivia.
Thank you.
Olivia, it's been an honor. Thank you so very much for having us on.
Yes, please take care, both of you. Skolutions is a podcast created, produced, and edited by me, Olivia Wall. Special thanks to my guests, Beth Skelton and Tan Hyun. Also, a big thank you to my older son, Benjamin, who created the music that's playing in the background. I would love for you to share the podcast far and wide, leave a review, subscribe on YouTube, and follow us on TikTok, Twitter, Instagram, Threads, and Facebook at Skolutions Podcast. If you'd like to become a Skolutions sponsor or share episode ideas, leave me a SpeakPipe voice memo at my website, oliviawall.com/podcast, or connect via email at skolutionspodcast@gmail.com. Please keep listening. Let's continue finding inspiration together.